Clement First was Pope for about 11 years. Actually, he was the fourth Pope of the Catholic Church from the year 88 until 99. And during that time, the Church witnessed a reign of persecution. Actually, thousands of people lost their lives for the faith. Eventually, of course, Clement himself was actually also a victim and was martyred. However, today we're going to look at the main reason he is considered one of the most important early church fathers. It's mainly related to a letter he wrote while Bishop of Rome in the year 95 or 96. He wrote the letter mainly to re-establish the leaders of a church at Corinth in Greece, 900 miles away, where there was a dispute where younger members overthrew the bishop and the deacons. It's a long letter. It's about 60 paragraphs in length, actually, and however, it's mainly about only the last few paragraphs deal with the issues at Corinth. The rest of the letter deals with a whole range of other issues dealing with the danger of pride and also the example of the humility of Christ and the need for order to prevail within the church in order to reflect God's will. So he's considered one of the earliest and, in fact, one of the most important church fathers. He was very closely connected with Peter, the first pope. He possibly knew him, but this is not known for sure. Actually, little is known about his early life. However, his main influence on Christianity comes from this first letter to the Corinthians, because in this letter, he actually calls for peace and stability. He highlights the dangers of pride and the virtues of humility and obedience. And towards the end of the letter, however, he also demands the re-establishment of the overthrown leaders at Corinth. This is very important. In doing so, he actually shows the vital necessity to respect apostolic succession and the authority of the Bishop of Rome, to command authority and respect way beyond Rome itself. So this letter was read out in many churches in the early decades of Christianity. It actually formed part of the early Bibles, especially the Greek Bible, as you'll see later. And it establishes the papacy in its infancy and the influence of Rome on the entire church. So Clement's life ended in martyrdom like most of the early popes, and later historians say that he was exiled and executed by being tied to an anchor and thrown into the sea. His actual feast day is on the 23rd of November, and he is also remembered as a great peacemaker, a teaching maker, and a foundational leader of the early Christianity. So this letter of Clement is actually filled with a sense of both humility and authority. It's one of the earliest examples of great Christian literature. In fact, it contains about 60 paragraphs, and it provides very important insights into the thinking of the early church leadership. It's one of the earliest surviving texts, of course, outside the actual New Testament itself, and it's still influential in Christianity right to the present day. In fact, it's actually formed part of some of the early Bibles, especially in Greece. It was actually read out in many of the churches at that time, which shows how influential it was. And it also shows the emerging significance of Rome as a leading authority and actually the acceptance of the influence of the Bishop of Rome way beyond his own territory. Corinth actually is about 900 miles from Rome, which is an enormous distance at that time. So this letter also shows that the church was also being severely persecuted by the Roman authority at that time. So in this video, we're going to journey back into the past to the roots of Christianity itself and see how one of the great leaders and martyrs influenced the course of history. So that's just a brief look at the man's life. Now we'll take a more detailed look at the actual letter itself. It's called Clement's First Letter to the Corinthians. It's one of the earliest Christian writings outside actually of the New Testament itself. It was written around the year 95, 96. He was Pope from 88 to about 99. So this is in the middle of his papacy. And it was addressed to the church in Corinth, which was experiencing a lot of division and disputes over the leadership in that church. And this letter is basically, it's a call to the Christians there to restore unity, to restore humility and order in the community. Clement actually starts off the letter by praising the Corinthian church for its earlier faith and its good works and he expresses sorrow in relation to the current unrest. He also reminds them of the dangers of pride and jealousy, and he uses examples. He shows how he was a great theologian for that time, actually. He uses example from the Old Testament, Cain and Abel and stories like that to show the dangers of pride. He also appeals to the Christian virtues of humility, obedience, and love, and encourages the Corinthians to respect those who have been appointed to lead them. Clement actually also strongly emphasizes that church order is not a human invention, but is part of God's design and with roles established through the apostles and Christ's authority itself. So this first letter of Clement is considered important for several reasons. For instance, the Anglican theologian J.B. Lightfoot, he talked about how that it was the first breath of Catholic theology because it showed that the early church structure and the concern for unity among Christian communities, and that this was actually something that Rome was quite concerned about. Also another theologian, Hans Kung, he admired, and he was a friend of John Paul, of course, he admired how this letter actually balances the authority of the church with humility and saw it as an example of how early Christian pastoral care was the norm rather than domination. And a third theologian that we could talk about would be Joseph Ratzinger. He's considered one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. He also became, of course, Pope Benedict XVI. He valued this letter as a key witness in terms of what he called apostolic tradition, showing that the early church preserved unity and passed on the teachings faithfully. That's the teachings of the apostles and of Christ himself. So Clement's letter is considered very influential because it's one of the earliest examples of how Christians actually solve problems by looking at the teachings of the apostles and looking at the life of Christ himself, the harmony and peace and love that he preached. So it shaped how the church thinks about leadership and about authority and unity. And this letter has remained respected ever since throughout the Christian community. It continues actually to be studied today as a vital link between the apostles and the later church by theologians worldwide. So just to give a brief summary in relation to this letter, it's known as the first letter of Clement it's written as Pope, he's Pope. It's roughly about the year 95, 96. And it establishes at a very early stage the actual authority of the Bishop of Rome to actually have a very real say on what's happening. Corinth is about somewhere around 850 or 900 miles, which is a huge distance at that time because people could only travel by boats. And one diocese was in actually Italy and modern day Italy, and the other one was in Greece and Corinth, 800 or 900 miles away. So that is, the letter was actually about 60 paragraphs long, and the last 2 or 3 paragraphs were given over to establishing the authority of Rome, to re-establish elders. There was a bishop and a number of deacons that were overthrown by younger, ambitious members. That's why the letter is so important. It established at a very early stage the idea of apostolic succession, and that people who were officially appointed could not be overthrown in the church. So the letter actually was part of the early Bible. It was also part of the Greek Bible. It was known at one stage as the Codex Alexandrinus. And that Bible was actually presented to King Charles in the 17th century, actually in the year 1827. And it was read out in many churches. This letter, Clement First, was read out in many churches, especially in the early centuries of the church. So it established the authority of Rome. It established apostolic succession and some of the very early principles of Catholicism. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video, if you'd like to see others like it. So goodbye for now.